I'm very excited that this next panel will take us from the realm of walking and talking here in the States to Washington and to solutions to this problem. So can I ask the members of Congress, Congressman John Sarbanes, Congresswoman Annie Kuster, and former Congresswoman Carol Shea Porter to come up to the stage and take a seat. And I will introduce them. And this panel is about the solutions in Washington and from the leaders in Washington who are helping to put them into practice. So again, folks at the back, please come on up and take a seat. And I want to welcome our members of Congress. It is a great honor to have them with us as a show that this issue is commanding the attention and leadership from folks in Washington as much as we tend to malign Washington. Our first speaker, Congressman John Sarbanes, has represented Maryland's 3rd District in the U.S. Congress since 2007. In Congress, he's been appointed to the Committee on Energy and Commerce, where he served on the Subcommittee on Health and the Subcommittee on Energy and Power. To counter the influence of big money in politics, Congressman Sarbanes is leading the effort in Congress to build a democracy for the many, not the few. The Government by the People Act, which was authored and introduced by the Congressman, would establish a citizen-led alternative to the current big money-dominated campaign finance system. Welcome, Congressman Sarbanes.
Thank you. Thank you.
Our next speaker will go to the end. Congresswoman McLane Kuster was first elected to the House of Representatives to represent New Hampshire's 2nd District, where I and a lot of you live, just a little bit to the west of here, in November of 2012. Prior to taking office, Annie served as a longtime community activist and an adoption attorney who focused her career on increasing opportunity for Granite State families. A strong advocate for seniors, students, veterans, and women and their families, Annie has always been committed to fighting for the issues that matter most to Granite Staters, like increasing access to higher education and affordable health care, and cutting waste, fraud, and abuse in the federal government to ensure our taxpayer dollars are used wisely. Welcome, Annie Kuster.
Thank you.
And last but not least, Carol Shea Porter is a former and quite possibly future representative from New Hampshire's 1st District, currently running for re-election. She was born in New York City, is a graduate of Oyster River High School in Durham, University of New Hampshire, and she has worked as a social worker and professor and is a leading voice in the local fight for campaign finance reform. Welcome, Carol.
Thank you.
So we're going to ask all 3 of these leaders to speak for between 5 and 10 minutes, and then we're going to open it up to the floor. Congressman Sarbanes.
I'll start here, and then we can do questions from the table. Good afternoon, everybody. It's great to be here, especially with Annie Kuster and Carol Shea Porter, my current colleague and Annie, former and hopefully, as was indicated, future colleague Carol Shea Porter. We worked together for many it seemed like many years, because it was a rough time when we were there, but we got some good things done. I'm incredibly pleased to be here in New Hampshire. This is not my first rodeo in terms of the New Hampshire rebellion. I was up here a couple of years ago. I was persuaded by Larry Lessig and some others to come up and participate in that march that they did across the state. So I did 7 miles in 0-degree weather one morning. And there's still parts of my body that are thawing out from that experience. But I was glad to do it. And I want to congratulate Dan Weeks and all the people who are keeping this effort on the forefront of everyone's minds, not just here in New Hampshire, but in the country. Yeah. They're doing great work. They're doing great work. So I'm going to be pretty brief because I know we got folks here who probably want to ask a lot of questions, so we'll get through the front end of our remarks, and then we can open it up and have an interactive discussion. When it comes to this issue of money in politics, I think we can and people mostly are stipulating to the problem. I don't think there's anybody anywhere on the political spectrum or in any walk of life who denies that the influence of money on our politics and the way we govern in this country, whether you look at the local level, state level, and certainly in Washington, has gotten to a place where we've got to fix it. The system is fundamentally broken. People with deep pockets, the insider crowd, has too much influence over the way policy gets made. And as a result, the average person, everyday citizens out there, look at Washington and places where laws are made and they say, our voice doesn't count, we aren't being heard, we're locked out, we're left out, we've been pushed to the sidelines of our own democracy. And people are angry about it. They're frustrated, they're cynical. But the good news is they're starting to channel that towards solutions. And if you look at the kinds of solutions that are available to us, they basically fall into two main categories. There's solutions which I call rules, putting rules in place to make sure that the big money isn't kind of running over the rest of us. And that's where you see things like transparency and disclosure, so we know where that big money comes from. It's yeah, where do we see that? It's also where you see this effort around a constitutional amendment, changing the composition of our court to make sure that Congress has the ability to regulate big money. So it's important to have rules. It's important to put a referee on the field of our democracy to make sure that those big money actors are playing by the rules, to make sure that when some super PAC gives a steroid injection to Marco Rubio or Chris Christie, somebody blows the whistle on that and says that's not the way you should play the game. So we got to put a ref on the field, and that's what rules are for. But at the same time, we have to create reforms that are about power, about giving power back to the average citizen out there. So they're not just sitting up in the bleachers watching the democracy play out on the field, but they come out of the bleachers onto the field of their own democracy, and they can say, I am a power player. I'm a power player. Even though I can maybe only give $25 or $50 to a campaign, I'm a power player. And this is where I've been working in Washington to try to put some solutions forward that can create a small donor-driven system of public financing for congressional campaigns in this country. Thank you. It's called the Government by the People Act. And the whole idea behind it is let's make that small donor, that everyday citizen, the average person out there, let's not just make them relevant again to their democracy, let's put them at the center of it. And the way you do that in our proposed legislation is, number one, we would give every American citizen who contributes to a congressional campaign would get a small tax credit, refundable tax credit, to make it easier for them to step up and participate. If we're going to build a new system of funding campaigns in this country that puts everyday citizens at the center of it, we got to make it a little bit easier for the average person to step into the arena. And that's what that tax credit does. The second thing we do, and this is the most important, is we come behind that small donation with matching funds, so that the voice of the $50 donor under our bill earns a 6-to-1 match. That's another $300. All of a sudden, the $50 donor has a voice worth $350 to the candidates. Now, what does that mean? That means that the candidate that couldn't hear you yesterday, because in a world where money is speech and there's $1,000 donors and PACs wandering around, your $50 donation could never get their attention. Tomorrow, if you pass legislation that offers matching funds coming in behind that donation, all of a sudden that candidate can hear you. You've seen that Verizon commercial where the guy says, "Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?" Right now, most candidates can't hear everyday citizens, because the noise coming from the big donor crowd is so loud, they can't be heard. But if we create a way to put power back in the hands of everyday citizens so their voices can be heard, candidates will choose to go there instead of going to the PACs, instead of going to the big donors and the big money and the deep-pocketed insiders. That's the paradigm shift. So whatever else we're doing out there to push forward important agendas, We've got to make sure that we go build a new system of funding campaigns in this country that gives power back to everyday people out there in America. And we can do it. This is not impossible. We need 218 votes in the House of Representatives. We need 51 votes in the U.S. Senate. We need a presidential signature. Now, that's not easy, but it's doable. And we have already 157 Democrats who've co-sponsored the Government by the People Act in Congress, and we have one Republican. But we're building. And we're going to get this done. And the reason we're going to get it done is because we have people like Annie Kuster and Shea Porter and others who've become part of an advocate coalition across the country that understands that this sentiment, this feeling of taking back our country now, is an undeniable force in American politics. And it will demand satisfaction. And if we can put these kinds of constructive, restorative solutions in front of people, we're going to get the change that people want to see. And then when they get up in the morning and they turn on the television and they see some pundit talking about the Koch brothers or another super PAC, they can say, you know what? I don't care about that anymore because we've gone and built a system that makes government accountable to us. That's the promise of the kinds of reforms that we're working on right now. Thank you for your help and thank you for your support.
Thank you so much. Annie Kuster, Congresswoman from the 2nd District here in New Hampshire.
Thank you, Dan, and thank you to all of you for turning out on this incredibly important, I would say the #1 issue in our elections. I think it's appropriate that we are gathered here on the eve of the First in the Nation primary because the rebellion that we feel is going to start here and go all the way across the country. And I'm really excited to be here with my former and future colleague, Shea Porter, and with my good friend and colleague, John Sarbanes. I'm very proud to be an original co-sponsor with John, and I feel like my experience has been somewhat a precursor or a pilot project, if you will, on how this would work. I was very fortunate when I first ran in 2010. I wasn't elected that time. I came in 2012. But I was very fortunate to have very broad grassroots support with small donors as the background, the backbone of my campaign. And in 2012, when I was elected, I had 30,000 small donors. The average contribution was $75, but that was in congregate. So that was adding up the $7 here, the $12 there, the $5 there. And these are the people that created the backbone for me to always be able to have the grassroots support. These are the people that put a sign on their lawn, that remembered to go vote, that told their friends and neighbors, that took a bumper sticker, that it's who I represent, and it reminds me of representing the people every single day. So that when I got to Washington, and I got engaged with the process of making legislation and making sure that we're tackling tough problems like equal pay for equal work, or better wages for people, for families, or access to affordable health care and higher education, or voting on the wars, whatever it might be. When I take a vote, I know that I'm representing the people of the 2nd District of the state of New Hampshire. And whenever I do get involved with people, and from time to time, certainly I've been supported by Emily's List and NARAL and Planned Parenthood, and by some of the companies that have lots of jobs right here in New Hampshire. But I'm able to say to them, or the unions, my good friends and the workers representing workers, is that I'll be able to say to them, either I'm with you or I'm not with you, but I'm representing the people of the state of New Hampshire. And that if you agree with me, I'm happy to have you support me. But if I don't agree with you, I don't have to worry about your interests or your involvement in whether or not you're going to support the campaign. And I think that makes a tremendous amount of difference. And I'm really proud to have John here and get behind his bill. You all can help. This this is going to be a grassroots movement all across the country. We've got to make sure that we have not only every single Democrat in the House and Senate on board to the Sarbanes legislation, but that we reach across the aisle to our colleagues and make sure that they understand. And the most exciting thing I think about the 2016 election is that when Carol first got this started, and she'll talk about when she started running, and when John first got this started, and when we were sort of voices crying in the wilderness, and now you can feel this grow. You can feel it right here in the New Hampshire primary. You can feel candidates talking about it, and it's become a critical issue. We were just talking to Nick from the We the People that are organizing all of this about the exit polling in Iowa, and it was fascinating. They found that, I think he said 64% of the voters in the Democratic caucus in Iowa had this campaign finance reform issue in their top 3 issues that they were using to make a decision about voting. And I think that says a lot about how fast this issue is growing and how widespread our support is. So I appreciate all the time. Thank you to Dan Weeks and the incredible group that's put up literally this tent and this whole situation here. Thank you all for turning out, and we look forward to working with you to get the Sarbanes bill passed in Congress.
Well, it looks like we lost Dan, but you know I'm not shy, so I'll just introduce myself. I'm Carol Shea Porter, and I admire this woman who served New Hampshire so well and brought the attention of the nation on this terrible tragedy, really, of the way we finance campaigns. And as you all know, she walked across the country to highlight that, and looked like we were making some progress, and then we fell backwards. But I had the great pleasure of marching with her in her parade in Portsmouth and supporting her. And on her 100th birthday, she sent me a lovely note. And I thought if we could only keep that woman 200 years, she could have gotten it done. And would have. And then I too marched in freezing cold with the New Hampshire Rebellion. Freezing cold. I didn't go the whole distance, I have to admit. I only did Manchester to Bedford, but it was pretty tough. So my hat's off to people who went the whole distance, but I am going to go the whole distance on campaign finance reform. When I came, thank you. When I came to politics, I started to run. And John and I were in that class, that 2006 class that made such great change. And John has been a leader in this issue, so I want to thank you for that. And of course, Annie joined us. And we have been committed to changing the way we finance politics. Why? Frankly, because it stinks. It's hard for everybody. And it is really eating away at our democracy. When I started to run in 2006, I made a commitment then that I would never take corporate PAC money or DC lobbyist money. And I never have. I never have, but I will tell you, many, many times people have said to me, you know, if you plan to be there helping us, you better change that because of the effect that we've had with Citizens United. I will never change that, but I will tell you that I do not criticize my colleagues who feel that it's more important to be there so then they can fight than the way that they get there. And the reason I say that, and I believe me, I'm never going to change how I run my campaigns, is the people who take that money over and over and over again, use it, the super PAC money and all the other money, use it to hammer us all the time. And we know that it works. In 2010, when they came after me after Citizens United, I was outspent 11-1. About 2 weeks before the election, I had the TV on, and there were 6 commercials between the shows. 5 of them were against me. 5 out of 6. And I said, holy mackerel, where'd this money come from, right? $2 million the last week. I have to thank the Koch brothers, and I have to thank all these other groups for making my name so well known in this state. Because wherever I go, they say, Carol Shea Porter, wait a minute, that's really familiar. And I said, well, thank you. And I had a woman in Boston say to me one time, she stopped me at Logan Airport, and she said, are you in TV? She said, you look very familiar. I said, well, actually, I am on TV. I said, not on purpose, but yes, I am on TV. And then when I told her, she said, oh, that's right. Now I remember. So it has that impact, has that effect. It sits in people's minds when you do that. I have signed on to every single piece of legislation that will change this. And there are many people in Congress sitting here and other people who really want to change this. But we need your help. I've said before, we can't change ourselves from the inside out. We have to be changed from the outside in. And that means all of you have to be involved in this. But until we succeed 100%, and I just want to say that, talking about free speech, their argument about free speech, if money is free speech, then some people are freer than others. And that's not how it's supposed to be in this country. Every voice is supposed to be heard. So until we reach that moment, what do? How do we change this? Well, this is a great start, and the effort has been building, and I'm very proud of what all of you have done. But as the elections approach, we need you to be our messengers. You can be our TV ads and our radio ads, and you can put the ads in the newspaper by writing those letters to the editor and by talking to your friends and neighbors and talking about what happens when all this money comes. I want to say to you, some members of Congress are corrupt, but many, many, many are not. I would say most are not. What they are, though, is they're afraid. They are afraid of those ads. They're afraid of that money coming against them. And so too often they're silent when they should be shouting. But we need you to shout also. There's no way that we can change this until every American stands up and demands that change. So let's work together on this. Let's believe that we still are the people and that we actually have more power when we stand together. When we stand together and we write those letters and we talk and we get on those talk shows that I know so many of us avoid because we know who dominates those talk shows, get on it. Give that message everywhere. Let that message fly all over the land, and we will change the way we finance them. And when we change the way we finance these campaigns, what will we see? Well, I'll tell you what we'll see. We'll see a much fairer tax structure. We'll probably see wage increases. We will see work done on the issues that we care about. We'll see us taking on the oil companies in a larger way and taking on people who pollute our planet in a larger way, and we'll get it done. And we'll see legislation that supports students, and they will be the ones who will be able to lower their rates at banks. They won't be blocked anymore. Members of Congress will speak up and feel stronger when they do that. So before everybody throws the word corrupt around, because I want to tell you, I would tell you if I found it a totally corrupt place. I would be honest with you. I've never held back. It's fear, and it's fear because of the money. It's fear on the Republican side. You see, they all signed that pledge. They all signed a pledge that they'll never raise taxes $1, no matter what happens, whether bridges fall down, whether we can't serve people in the hospital, no matter what. Do they all feel that way? No, they don't. But they fear the power of those super PACs and those groups coming out against them. So help everybody who's running for Congress or any office to be less afraid by saying, we're standing behind you, we've got your back. We're standing in front of you, we're covering you. We're standing side by side, we're walking with you. And we're walking for fundamental change in the way that we finance campaigns so that we know that when we send people to Congress or send them to Concord or send them anywhere else, they are hearing our voices. So thank you for the work that you're doing. Let's go out and keep going and keep walking in the cold. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. If I can put a first question to the members on this stage, and then we'll open it up to the floor. It often feels, I think, to a lot of us out here in New Hampshire and around the country, like there's a pretty wide gulf between the grassroots, between home and Washington. And a lot of folks don't feel a lot of ability to access or influence what happens in Washington. And yet I think there are probably people who have known and campaigned for you and maybe have a different view. But for folks who haven't gotten to get involved, how can we take the energy that I think is in this tent and partner with you, channel it toward concrete constructive action beyond just the walks, but passing these bills that so need to pass? And any of you, please.
Well, I think you can start even before the legislation passes by encouraging people all across the country to run their campaigns the way we do the campaigns here in New Hampshire. So there's a reason that our campaigns are different, and this opportunity to demonstrate this during the presidential primary. I've done 100 house parties in a single campaign, and we do town halls, we visit with people, we spend time with people, and I think that's different. A lot of parts of the country, they're not as close to their democracy. What I love about John's model is that you incorporate raising the dollars to run the campaign with your grassroots campaigning, so that you're spending time with people in a way that engages people. And I think that's certainly the way Carol's always run her campaigns, and if we can encourage more of our colleagues to run their campaigns that way, and we can pass John's legislation to give us the opportunity to have a broader base.
Okay. I think if all of the people who could afford to send $10 or $20 actually did that, and if you helped find those people that gave $10 or $25, or your time and found other people, because every time you have a volunteer working, it means you don't have to have a staffer, so you control the cost. So by putting some of your muscle into everybody's campaign, no matter who you decide to support, that helps. I know that I have run my campaign primarily with volunteers because I have a great grassroots, they're very generous, and they work hard. Some never put $1 in, they can't, but their time is just as valuable. Do not devalue yourself. And that's important. Don't think, well, what do I have? You know, I don't really have any money. I really don't have any experience. And I don't really know how to write a letter. I'm not particularly fluent in that. What do I have? You have what everybody else has. You have a stake in how this turns out. And I tell people, when you go to the poll, or you bring 10 people to the poll, and I know people here remember my message in '06, and it still is, please find me $10 and 10 voters. You can do that for whomever you decide to support. So really, we don't have to wait, although we want all those changes. I want those super PACs gone. But until then, we don't have to wait for everything. We can start right now taking this back by being more active. And should you worry about the kind of letter that you think you write, have you ever read some of the letters to the editor? Okay? Don't worry about it. Just put your thoughts to paper, 2 lines, 3 lines, 4 lines. Even if you just said, I want change. I want people like me to decide elections, not super PACs. That's a full letter right there. So put yourself into it and find other people who will do that as well.
I want to echo what Annie and Carol Shea Porter just said. I mean, just one-on-one, reach out to your neighbors, to your coworkers. The next time you hear somebody complaining about how money has too much influence in our politics, I don't care whether they're Republican, an independent, or a Democrat, because frankly, everybody's complaining about it. Just say to them, you know what? We're going and building our own system to fund campaigns. Tell it to them like it's a secret almost. Did you hear that people are organizing around the country to build an alternative system for funding campaigns in this country that'll put you back in charge? Did you hear that? Oh, really? Where's that happening? Well, it happened in Maine on November 3rd. It happened in Seattle on November 3rd. It's happening in Arizona, and Connecticut, and New York City, and Montgomery County, Maryland. Did you hear about it? Yeah. We're building a system for funding campaigns in America that will give people their voice back. Do you want to join that movement? Say that to whoever complains to you, and emphasize to them that this isn't about just coming up with another set of rules to govern the behavior of the bad actors out there. This is about power. This is about creating power where America lives and getting the attention of candidates again and putting us back in charge. Tell them that that's happening and ask them to get involved. And there's so many groups now that are part of this coalition. Once you get their attention, once you capture their imagination, once you bring them into what is, by all criteria, now a movement to take back government from special interests, then we're moving forward. That's what you say to your neighbors in your town.
Thank you so much. Before going to the next questions, I understand that Congresswoman Kuster does have another commitment. Thank you so much for being here for 45 minutes. And we'll let you take your leave. Thank you very much, Congresswoman Kuster.
Thank you.
And we'll continue with
Much
Carol Shea Porter and
so.
John Sarbanes.
Good to see you.
And sorry, just before you go, can I call up James Madison? We must present you with, not that you need New Hampshire maple candy, but we've got one with your name on it and our water bottle.
Presenting you with something, and I'm going to look. We are going to look very important.
Oh, great. Here we go.
Yeah, well,
Here we go.
So thank you very much, Congresswoman Kuster. And let's thank you, James Madison. On we go. Thank you. Great to have you. And we'd like to open it up. Questions for Congressman Sarbanes or Carol Shea Porter? I want to start a little in the back. Okay.
Thanks for coming out. I will preface this by saying that I still hold a grudge against King George. All right. But it feels a little bit like a red herring where the money comes from. It's an obscene amount of money that is spent over the 10 months. Is there anything we can learn from the British system of a much shorter time and a cap on the amount of money that is spent?
So the question was, is there any way we can do something more like the British system where there's a cap on the amount of time and the amount of money that's spent? And there are other systems actually around the world that seem to be much more rational when it comes to how you run a campaign and the influence of money over it. The challenge we have in this country, which is not in a lot of these other places, is the First Amendment and the current court's interpretation of the First Amendment. And so attempts to limit the time period in which you can actually campaign, as well as limit the way money comes into politics, if the court is going to stick by this notion that money is speech. Our ability to do that, to put those limits in place, is relatively compromised right now. Now, if we can get the court to buy into a different jurisprudence going forward, maybe we can make some strides on that, although I will tell you that I think a robust First Amendment will probably never permit us getting to a place where we actually put time limits on the campaign, or have, not permit any kind of money to come into campaigns. That's why it's so important that if money is going to have a role, and it's going to have a role, that we find a way to give that power back to the citizenry and to the public. And the good news is that the investment we would have to make in order to, in a sense, buy our government back from the moneyed special interests is relatively small compared to the return you get in the form of good public policy. Oil and gas industry, $5 billion a year in taxpayer subsidies. Why? Because they're spreading a lot of campaign money around. Pharmaceutical industry doesn't have to negotiate its prices with the Medicare program. 40 million beneficiaries coming into that marketplace could get a really good price, except there's a provision in law that doesn't permit us to negotiate because the pharmaceutical industry has been spreading their money around for decades. If there was a publicly financed system, we could fix that provision and we could save the taxpayer tens of billions of dollars a year. So you will get back in spades the money that you invest in creating a system that's more accountable to the people. And that's why I think it's a pretty practical solution given what we face right now.
I also think that we could make a difference if we had an active FEC. If they actually enforced the laws and pulled these cases. We know that this super PAC coordination that's not supposed to exist is a big joke, right? We all know that. So if we really pressured the FEC, now they can't do too much about that, but there are other things they can do. They can more closely examine campaigns, and right now they've been in gridlock for a long time. That's why it's amazing that they actually made a decision for our New Hampshire congressman, 6-0. And that's actually so unusual for them to come to any conclusion because they've been so divided. So we need to address the weakness that we all can see in the FEC. I also think it is reasonable. I never give up hope about passing legislation to take away some of the super PACs. They're coordinating. Let's just say it straight. They are. I also think, like Donald Trump, it's a really bad idea for a presidential candidate to be able to self-finance, because now there's no fear about anybody, and it becomes a system that's only for the oligarchs. We already know that most of Congress is very wealthy. Now, that in and by itself should not be the problem. I mean, we all would like to create wealth, right? Are they able to take that money and overwhelm any other campaign? And that's what we saw with Trump, right? So I would like to see some changes there as well, saying that there's just a certain amount of money and that, you know, that should not be in there. So I'm feeling a lot more radical about how this system needs to change, and really impatient about it. But, like I said, until we get what we need, we certainly should stay on the road and take the victories as they come. But you have to not only literally be marching on the road, but figuratively marching on the road in order for members to feel that pressure, and for an administration and for an FEC and any other organization that's supposed to oversee this. For them to feel the pressure, we need to be applying it. So, and it has to be all the time.
Before the next question, can I just give a shout out to James Madison, who's here with us tonight? Because James Madison, although he's a lot taller than I think history suggests he was, James Madison said that government should be dependent upon the people alone. Donald Trump's out there telling you that you should elect him because he's the only one who's bought and sold and he's independent. But that wasn't what Madison envisioned. He envisioned that government would be dependent on somebody, but the somebody would be the people. That's what he said. And if you build a system of small donor-driven public financing to underwrite campaigns in this country, you are creating a system that makes government dependent upon the people alone. That's what we need to get back to.
One question here, and then we'll go over to the other side.
I just wanted to thank you so much for your attention to this issue, and I'm curious, based on your time in Congress and because of your attention to this issue, what you believe when an industry pays money to an official who's already elected, and then that individual proposes or passes legislation that benefits the industry that made a donation, what do you think is more common, that the industry went and bought the politician, or the politician went to a previously politically uninvolved industry and demanded donations, funds, or favors in order to make bad legislation go away or positive legislation come to pass? Thank you.
Well, I heard the second part, and that's actually illegal. I'm not saying that it couldn't and doesn't ever happen anywhere, but I know one thing: if a politician goes and demands money in order for an exchange, that is straight illegal. But I hear you. So, you know, the problem again, and believe me, I never like to use the word victim, but I've certainly had a lot of money thrown against me without being able to respond in the same fashion. So I understand, you know, and I don't want that money around me either. But I have to reiterate that while we have reason to feel cynical and we see a lot of dirty stuff, I would tell you that most people I know, members of Congress, I'm sure you'll back me up, John, they hate this system. It takes them away from their jobs. It takes them away from their family. It takes them away from a normal life. It is not fun to sit in a room 10 hours a day and call for money. I don't do it, but I do have to place some calls to individuals, and, you know, it's not fun. And so if you really had a conversation, a candid conversation with all these representatives, most of them would tell you they despise that system. So how do we capitalize that and change that? Like I said, let them know you've got their back, you're standing in front of them, you're defending them from the side, that this is something that, you know, you're going to walk with them and you're going to support them. And I think until we get laws with greater teeth in them, that's the best answer I can give about how you negate some of what he just talked about.
So, you know, the question is, how does this start? Is it the the special interest going to the member and saying, I'm not going to support your campaign unless you vote the right way on this bill? Or is it the member of Congress going to the special interest and saying, I'm not going to vote this way on your bill unless you give me a campaign contribution? The fact of the matter is, maybe that happens in a small percentage of the cases. What's really happening is just the effects of human nature in a system where you become increasingly dependent on certain sources of money in order to be viable and survive in politics. And so what you do is you develop blind spots, right? You know somewhere in the recesses of your mind when it's coming time to vote on something. And those recesses have been sort of stimulated recently because a lobbyist from an industry happened to wander through your office. Somewhere in the recesses of your mind, you're thinking, if I vote the wrong way on this, maybe that industry won't help me next time. And last time, that was $50,000 in my campaign. Now, are you making a conscious decision to change your vote in order to get donations from that industry? I don't think so. I think somewhere in your mind, it's human nature. You're finding a way to rationalize things. And what happens is if you get 435 members of Congress who are human inside a system like that, then the institution as an aggregate begins to lean too much in the direction of where the money comes from and away from people. It leans towards the donors and away from the voters, which again is why the solution is make the voters the ones who are the source of funding your campaign. Then there's no tension anymore, right? If you're powering your campaign by turning to everyday citizens and getting the power of public financing behind you, then when you go to vote on something, you're voting with the people who also happen to be the folks that powered your campaign. So there's no conflict of interest anymore. That's why we need to go build a system like this. So I think most members of Congress are victimized by the system as it exists now. And if we were given a choice, if we could go build this other system I've been telling you about, so that a candidate could be viable and competitive by going in that direction, by turning to the people instead of turning to K Street and a special interest, we'd go there in an instant. But that system doesn't exist. There's nowhere else to go. So let's build it. Let's get the people to go build it, and then that's where we'll spend our time and our energy and our focus, and we'll start making public policy again for the people of this country instead of for the inside crowd.
So first of all, I wanted to commend you for your efforts towards laws to fix this. But I've been very impressed this cycle with Bernie Sanders, who has raised $100 million using $27 average contributions. I'm wondering if there's a way to make the Democratic Party, I know we're not supposed to be partisan, but you all are Democrats, to get to the amount of money that we need from the people to replace what is used in super PACs and used in special interest without a change in the law, so that we could just, I think that part of the reason people give to Bernie and not you, even though you seem really good and I want you to win, is because they think someone else is funding it. And if you left the net of special interest money, then that would be a possibility to be a contrast. And then, what's the number that we need? Bernie got 100. What's the number that the Democratic Party needs in any 2 years to fund its operations well without using special interest money? What is that number, and how do we get to that number?
So, I mean, you have to be impressed with the network of small donors that Senator Sanders has been able to tap into. But I think we also have to recognize that there's a viral energy that operates in presidential races by definition. The profile of the candidates is higher, and it creates this kind of viral energy that then can generate a lot of these small donations in significant numbers across the country, and can be sufficient to help power a presidential campaign for some significant period of time. It's much harder to get that to kick in for the typical rank and file race for Congress, unless it's some kind of marquee race that's been nationalized, unless the candidate says things that are sort of so controversial and high profile that it causes some kind of wildfire response. I'll give you an example. Joe Wilson, who yelled "You lie" at the president at that State of the Union speech, raised about $1.5 million in 48 hours in increments of $30 or less, because he became a folk hero to a certain audience out there. But the typical member of Congress who doesn't have the kind of profile that can inject that kind of significant viral energy into their campaign from a funding standpoint is at much more of a disadvantage, and as a result, much more vulnerable and susceptible to the influence that the big money can have, because it costs a lot to run these campaigns. So that's why I think you need a combination of small donors who are driving it, plus matching funds that come in behind it. That's the public financing component. That combination then allows candidates to raise sufficient dollars, even among sort of the rank and file, that they don't have to go to the big money anymore. And so that's why I think that solution, that combination or hybrid solution, which is still all about the people, because it's partly the small donor who comes out of pocket and says, "I support you," and then it's partly the matching funds coming in behind it so that the candidate being supported can actually be viable. That's a way to get Congress off of this dependency. And let's face it, whoever becomes president of the United States, they say they want to raise a minimum wage, they say they want to tackle climate change, they say they want to make fixes to the healthcare system and so forth. They can't do any of that if Congress doesn't do it. The president is there to sign the bills that the Congress passes. So unless you liberate Congress and the rank and file member from the influence and dependency that they have on big money, you're never going to get the agenda on those issues move forward. So that's why we've got to come up with this system to solve the problem in Congress.
I think you also need to define, like, the special interest money, and hear me through, don't laugh yet. Because the reality is that, like, I take money from unions, working men and women, and that gets called PAC money, and I believe Bernie's had that money also. But working men and women are the reason I went to Congress, and I want them to have a voice. Now, why do I care so passionately about this? Because I put myself through college working in factories. I've never forgotten what I saw. So I know that the very wealthy always have a voice in Congress, but working men and women don't. And so I'm fine with having and honored to have union money. I stand side by side with them, and I always have. But if you read about that, you'd say, oh, well, you know, she's got PAC money. And you'd say it about Bernie, too. So we should not just say nothing. We should say, where's that coming from, before we take the next leap about what does that mean. So I know it's just like John said, that you know, there has to be some funding mechanism. You know that. If I did not run an ad, I can tell you right now that about 95% of the people who are hoping that I win so I can go fight for working men and women would say, why didn't you even run an ad? Why didn't you answer them? And my answer would be, because I had no money. I'm not a wealthy person. So I have to get small donors, and I do, and I thank all of you who have contributed. And I also have to have something that helps pay for my wonderful staff. So I can't run a campaign on air. So I do believe that we need those changes. I've been fighting for them from the very beginning so that we have those changes. But I will stand here proudly and tell you that I am proud to stand alongside working men and women every single day. I would not accept any corporate PAC money. So, you know, and people have their definition of what's acceptable and what's not. But what I want is to change it so that you don't need to do that at all. And I've told people many times, don't bring me your biggest check, bring me your best idea. And that's how it should be.
Thank you.
Okay.
Since we're low on time, can we take 3 questions? Maybe you can jot down a little note and then respond as best you can to the 3. But I'd love to get these 3 ladies who've been standing in line to ask their questions, and then you can answer them all.
Hi, thank you very much. My name is Anna Grace Raddick. Recently I ran for state senate in Massachusetts. I ran because I wrote 3 laws, 2 to prevent human trafficking in the immigration office, as well as one law to prevent white-collar crime, which would be giving people IDs through the local police. They could get a new ID within 2 weeks. Since running for the state office, I've learned a little bit about, the corporate interest groups, and my own experience in running is that I'm actually the victim of white-collar crime through MetLife. And MetLife is targeting Americans to sign life insurance policies in the millions of dollars, and they're doing internal money laundering. I went to them. I went to Manhattan to speak to them. I came up with an internal idea for them, but they didn't want to listen to it. And I noticed that they're a multinational company that makes billions of dollars, and I haven't really been able to fight this crime. I tried with this new ID program, and it doesn't seem to be picking up any steam because I believe that there's a lot of corruption and big money going on in politics. So those I've presented my ideas to, I don't know for what reason, but it's largely ignored. And I think we have a real problem in this country with life insurance. It's really affecting a lot of people. There are a lot of bad things going on. And I was just wondering if I may send some of these initiatives to you, I would appreciate it. And I do like a lot of what you have to say. I myself came from a working class background, and I've realized that this is an oligarchy. This is a capitalist government. I always thought that was a good thing because my grandfather worked on Wall Street and as an accountant for food and construction. But I realized that something has to change. There has to be some kind of regulation because people are being victimized by the system, either through low wages or white-collar crime, like the housing collapse and life insurance crimes. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna Grace. Can I take the next question as well? Thank you, and thank you for running for office. Stay in the game.
Speaking of big money, we have a big corporation called Kinder Morgan trying to put this giant pipeline through our state. We've been battling it in the south of New Hampshire for almost 2 years now. Yesterday, the DOE gave them permission to export this gas up to Canada and out to Europe. My question is, they've been putting all these phony $1 million commercials on TV telling everybody how their electric bills are going to go down and how much money they're going to save. They've also been telling us, the PUCs have also given people permission now to bill us. We're talking $600 a year on top of our electric bills to pay a tariff. My question is, how does a multi-million-dollar corporation for private profit gain able to come into our state and say, too damn bad, we're building a pipeline whether you like it or not? And I just want to know what your ideas are about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura, and for your work on this issue. And there's a table here with more information on the pipeline campaign. We're going to take one more question, and thank you for doing your best then to respond to the three.
Okay. I was just saying that my question is a little bit different, but it sort of speaks to what they were asking too, so it might be easy to bring it all together. When I hear about your bill, I still hear money, and I'm not too confident that it's going to completely change the tone, and maybe you can explain how it will. And I know you did a little bit already, but what I see in society is that there's a culture of independence, which is great, and a culture of bringing oneself forward, pulling oneself up by the bootstraps, and then along with this culture is the belief that if you align yourself with somebody with money, you're also going to get that money. And I think that's part of the Trump phenomenon, that people are they have some cognitive dissonance between what somebody's really talking about, what they're really going to do, i.e., we're going to make you independent, but we're still going to put this pipeline in your backyard. So I'm wondering, I still don't quite get how, I do understand that your bill is going to increase the power of the individual, but it still maintains that aspect of the money flow. And I was wondering if you can speak to that a little bit.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I'll start with the last question. I start from the premise that it's not the money in and of itself that's the problem. Obviously, when there's huge amounts spent, it's jarring and offensive to the American people's sense of what is right. But it's more about where the money's coming from. And if the money's coming from an insider group or corporate interests or the Halliburtons and Goldman Sachs of the world and so forth, then you can pretty much assume that it's their agenda that's going to operate. If the money comes from everyday citizens and from a public financing system, first of all, it wouldn't have to be as much money, because when you're enlisting those people, you're also enlisting people that will knock on doors and volunteer and make phone calls. So you're building an army of people that can support you in your campaign. But the fact of the matter is, if that money, if that power, if that sustenance of your campaign is coming from everyday citizens, then I believe ultimately most of the policy that will get enacted will be responsive to everyday citizens. So I think there's real promise. I'm not suggesting to you that you pass the Government by the People Act and the next day we wake up and everything in the world is hunky-dory. No, but it will be a declaration of special interest that the American people want to take their government back. Now, to the other two people that spoke, I was listening to you and I was remembering the debate we had over the health care legislation in Washington, where we would have these people coming in from around the country testifying very personally, heart-wrenching stories about how, because of a pre-existing condition, they couldn't get the care that they needed, or they've been bankrupted and so forth. And I'm hearing it again. What I'm hearing is people all across the country have examples at the local and state level. They have examples in their personal lives of how something that 70 or 80 or 90% of the American people would say needs to happen or needs to be fixed can't be fixed because there's some small group of very powerful people that have got a stranglehold on the system. It's morally wrong in a democracy to have that happen. And we not just have to empower everyday citizens to feel again like they own their democracy. We have to empower people like the first person who spoke to feel that you can go run for office and you don't have to be a millionaire to be viable. And the fact of the matter is, you look in Maine, you look in Connecticut, you look in Arizona, and people who could never have ventured to put their names into the ring because they didn't know a lot of people with a lot of money are running and competing because public financing is available to them, and they're serving in their state legislatures, and they're some of the best legislators in America. That's the paradigm shift that we can achieve if we go build a whole new system for funding campaigns in this country. And I'll end with this this metaphor. I went to Memphis, or I went to Selma this year. It was the 50th anniversary of the march from Selma to Montgomery, and much of the conversation, as you can imagine, was on the importance of the right to vote and protecting access to the ballot box and acknowledging the blood, sweat, and tears that have been shed by these civil rights soldiers, these soldiers for the civil rights movement back in the 1950s and the 1960s to secure access to the ballot box. But we also talked about the fact that you have to protect access to the ballot box, but you also have to protect the ballot box from getting hijacked on its way to Washington by big money and special interests. Because then you've lost the franchise all over again. All the American people are asking is that when we go to the voting booth and we cast our ballot because we believe that somebody is going to represent our interests in Washington, we believe they're going to go there and fight for clean water and clean air. We believe they're going to fight injustice in the insurance industry or the healthcare insurance industry, when we vote for them believing that they will represent our interests, why can't we have a system that will make sure that that can happen when they get there and that they don't get hijacked and co-opted by the big money? That's all they're asking for. That's not a tall order in a democracy. That's the fundamental tenet of a democracy. And unfortunately, a lot of good Americans have fled the town square, have gone up into the hills, have made the rational judgment that their voice doesn't matter anymore. And what they're saying to the politicians is, the system's rigged and we'll come back when you fix it. And what I'm saying to them is, we need you to come back in order to fix this system and make it your own. That's what we need to do.
Good point. So I believe we need a constitutional amendment that corporations are not people and they should not have the power to deliver so much money. I mean, I really think that, and we have to work on that state by state, as you know, and then also work so that our legislators support that idea. But for the first question, I can't speak specifically for what her case was, but I will tell you that we know there's white-collar crime, and it's not every individual's job to try to follow all of this, right? We need more people watching in Washington. We need legislation to follow this, whomever it is, wherever it goes. And I'll say something about Wall Street. I am heartbroken. Both of us were there during the debacle for Wall Street. I am heartbroken that nobody went to jail. And I can't explain it to you. I cannot explain that. But what I can tell you is that I never give up, and you shouldn't either. And I think that's, you know, what John's talking about as well, that your voices must be heard. You cannot head to the hills. What breaks my heart is when people say to me, "You're a politician, you're all the same." Now, think about your profession, whatever it is that you do in your life. You know some rotten eggs, some rotten eggs in your profession. You know some people that are amazing, and then you know others that are, doing the best they can. And I want you to know that there is reason for optimism. The man sitting next to me is leading a movement. And of course, there's Dan and everybody else, New Hampshire Rebellion, Larry, everybody's leading a movement for change. People are not all the same. There's many, 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 most of us, who want change. We just need to put our voices together, feel that power, and create that change. But if you decide you've had enough, that you know everybody's the same, and there's no point in being there, then there's no chance for that change. So you do hold the power. And when you go to the voting booth, and I know you know people who say they're not going to vote if one candidate wins, another doesn't win, right, or whatever. I've heard plenty of that. When you don't go to the voting booth, then you have just given up your vote and your voice. If you do go to the voting booth, and you must go, then you have exactly the same power for that one day. You have exactly the same power as Donald Trump, the billionaire, and everybody else. Why would you give that up? You must vote, and you must be heard, and you must find people who believe like you do and get them in there, and we will change it. Thank you for hearing that and for the applause there, because this is so important to me. I'm running around everywhere saying to people, you've got to vote. You've got to vote. It's the democracy. It keeps it alive. So thank you.
I want to thank Dan Weeks and New Hampshire Rebellion for convening this and the incredible work that they're doing. And also, if you want to participate or step up behind a national platform we're building to support our legislation in Congress, we've created something called the US campaign, and you can sign up for that and get a flyer before you leave. We need everybody to step into this fight. Here's the good news. As I said before, this is an undeniable force in American politics, and we will have our day. And the reason we know this to be true is because there's no alternative to that. Otherwise, we're signing away the democracy. So thank you for being here. Thank you for your hard work, your energy, and your advocacy. Let's go win the fight. Thank you.
Thank you. Great job.
There are a lot of issues that Congressman Sarbanes and Carol Shea Porter and Congresswoman Kuster could choose to devote their energy to, and they have made a choice to make this a #1 issue. And they are taking our energy and our passion to Washington and leading that fight, and we need to partner with them. So join me once again in thanking Congressman John Sarbanes, Carol Shea Porter, and if we could ask you to step in front and take a picture with James Madison, and in his hands is a scroll containing the names of 219,000 Americans who want to see your bill passed, Congressman. 219 folks around the country who've signed the Fight Big Money Pledge, presented there by James Madison.
And of course, a little bit of New Hampshire squeeze.
All right. Thank you again.